My name is Julia Hart, and what I'm about to share isn't just a story of revenge. It's the story of how to survive injustice with strategy, discipline, and a silence so calculated it becomes deafening. I didn't shout. I didn't confront. I didn't slam doors. But I saw everything. I noted everything. I waited for everything. And when the time came, it was I who had the final word. For 7 years, I was the strategic planning manager at Hathaway Global, a company that prided itself on valuing its talent. I was promoted twice on merit, recommended by directors, praised in internal reviews, and respected by external clients. My team respected me. So did the numbers. So when Thomas Creighton took over as vice president of the division, everyone expected continuity and growth, including me. But Thomas didn't want continuity. He wanted control. And where there were women in prominent roles, he saw threats, especially when those women refused to bow to his ego. During the first few months, he pretended to be cordial, called me an excellent asset, and said my work was essential to the company's vision. But soon came the uninvited meetings, projects reassigned, operational tasks given deliberately. And then the blow. I was removed from management and reassigned to an internal consulting role. No team, no access to key systems, no formal reason, just a vague mention of tactical restructuring. I knew immediately. It was personal. The humiliation wasn't public. It was elegant, quiet, almost procedural. But internally, it felt like being pushed off a cliff without warning. The new office was smaller, my badge lost its access privileges, and many colleagues, once warm, now treated me with uncomfortable distance. Most had gotten the message: don't get too close to someone who's been demoted. That first week, I considered quitting. By the second, I started building a plan. Not a plan for revenge. A plan for survival. For restoration. For justice. I began documenting everything. Every change in process flow, every centralized decision by Thomas made without approval, every ignored email, every dismissive comment delivered as a joke. I watched who benefited, who remained silent, and who simply obeyed. But I also started studying. Enrolled in an advanced corporate governance course. Quietly networked outside Thomas's circle, even with board members, using neutral events like forums and corporate trainings. I strengthened ties with strategic peers in other departments. And above all, I kept delivering. Even isolated, my work was better than ever. Thomas started growing irritated. Because he wanted me gone, and all he saw was my reinvention. He expected submission, not resilience. In one of the quarterly meetings after a Southeast Asia expansion project failed, Thomas tried to shift the blame onto my former team, which now reported directly to him. I used my technical presentation to show, with irrefutable data, exactly where the mistakes were: centralized decisions, lack of market research, poor resource allocation. I didn't name names, just facts. The board president approached me a few days later. Julia, would you consider joining a strategic review committee to support the executive board? That's when I knew the game had changed. In the months that followed, Thomas's credibility began to erode. He didn't notice, but his behavior was being observed. His authoritarianism, his insecurity masked as leadership, his resistance to hearing dissent. And I remained. Present, discreet, steady. Until the day I received a call from the president's office. The board had decided to restructure the upper leadership. Thomas would be transferred to a less sensitive area. And a new position, Executive Director of Strategic Transformation, would be created. For me. The following Monday, I walked onto the same floor I had been removed from a year earlier. And there he was. Thomas, packing up his things, avoiding my gaze. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My victory didn't need an audience. Or revenge. Just justice. And justice sometimes arrives dressed in silence, but wearing the right badge. After that day, something in me shifted. I stopped trying to make him see me. I stopped seeking his approval, or even his acknowledgement. I started operating in the space where real influence lives, the blind spots. While Harold paraded in meetings and clung to the illusion of control, I began gathering power quietly. Power built not on fear or politics, but on trust, delivery, and data. I became indispensable, not to him, but to the system. Every department that needed a fix, I was there. Every executive frustrated with vague reports or stalled projects, I stepped in. I stopped correcting Harold's public misstatements. I let them pile up and instead offered corrections privately to the right people. They noticed. At the same time, I started documenting everything. Not for revenge. For record. For clarity. I saved emails, recorded meeting summaries, kept timelines. Notebooks filled with the kind of details that matter when people finally start asking questions. And they would. I also began mentoring 2 junior analysts. Quiet, hungry, overlooked, just like I had been. I gave them my attention, my insights, and slowly built a shadow team of excellence beneath the radar. Our ideas began driving results, faster turnarounds, cleaner processes, stronger forecasts. And somehow, they always looked like Harold's success until people started connecting dots. It wasn't long before clients began requesting I attend briefings directly. They valued my perspective. That was the polite way of saying they trusted me more than him. One client, a global firm we'd been courting for years, requested me exclusively to lead their transition strategy. I said yes. And when the board saw the numbers from that rollout, they started asking how a demoted director had salvaged a $12 million account in under 90 days. Harold was blindsided. I watched him scramble, trying to reinsert himself into processes he hadn't touched in months. He began micromanaging random teams, issuing contradictory directives, trying to mark territory like a cornered animal. But it was too late. The culture had shifted. Behind the scenes, I had lunch with the COO. We talked about restructuring, about transparency, about the future of the company. It wasn't a formal interview, but it was. I was planting seeds. And they were growing. One day, an unexpected audit exposed a set of budget discrepancies, all linked to Harold's decisions. Nothing criminal, but sloppy. Unjustifiable. The board called for a quiet review. I wasn't asked to participate. I was asked to summarize the last 18 months of operational shifts. So, I handed them a timeline. Facts. Proof. Performance. And without a single insult, without raising my voice, I ended his reign. No one saw it coming. Not even him. Eric's dismissal didn't come with any drama. There were no official announcements or internal memos. On a Monday morning, his name simply disappeared from the company's digital directory. His office door remained slightly ajar for weeks, as if his absence were suspended in time, waiting for an explanation that never came. But for those who knew how to read the signs, and I did, it was the end of a cycle. A cycle of fear, control, and fragile appearances. Behind the scenes, something different was taking shape. My work had begun to shine in a new light. Without Eric there to sabotage or rewrite my deliveries, presentations reached the committee with my signature, my words, my reasoning. And gradually, the director's eyes started to look for mine, instead of someone to translate my analysis with more flair than substance. I was still the demoted one, officially in a technical support role, but the content I produced sustained million-dollar decisions. And everyone knew it. That's when I realized being heard wasn't enough. I needed to be recognized. That same week, I began to structure an internal positioning strategy. Nothing aggressive, nothing direct. Just enough to align my image with the real value I was delivering. I joined cross-functional groups, offered workshops on crisis management and strategic innovation. In every conversation, a dose of firmness and listening. In every email, surgical clarity. It didn't take long for the invitations to start arriving. Can you review this proposal for the committee? Would you be able to lead the Agora Project Task Force? They're considering reshaping the org chart. Do you have any suggestions? I did. And I delivered each suggestion with consistency, technical basis, and emotional intelligence. Officially, I was just another cog in a machine. But internally, I was already acting as an informal leader, and that began to bother some people. That's when Charles Dean, the general director, asked to meet with me privately. He was known for keeping his distance, rarely intervening in team matters, but something had prompted him to seek me out personally. Isabella, your name has been coming up often in recent committee meetings. What's going on? I'm just doing my job, sir, I replied. He gave a discreet smile.
Exactly.
And you're doing far beyond what's expected. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. He wanted to understand my processes, my vision for the future, and how I interpreted the company's current moment. I said little, but spoke with precision. At the end, he made me an offer to temporarily assume leadership of the department Eric had left behind. Nothing formal yet. I want to see how you perform on the ground. But I can tell you this. All eyes are on you. Use that wisely. And that's how my unofficial test began. For the first time, I stepped into that glass-walled office, where I had only ever delivered reports. This time, to lead. I redefined goals, reorganized workflows, and created space for active listening. There was no imposition, only direction. The team, once tense and dim under Eric's management, began to thrive within weeks. Results started to show. Metrics improved. Morale lifted. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. But a new challenge emerged. Gregory Lane, one of the vice presidents, didn't like the shift. He was a longtime friend of Eric's and clearly saw me as a threat. He began to question decisions, delay approvals, and pressure the team with contradictory demands. He was a new kind of saboteur, more subtle but no less dangerous. I didn't react impulsively. Instead, I documented. I gathered screenshots, meeting notes, conflicting decisions. I compiled everything and scheduled a meeting with Charles Dean. When I presented the material, I was direct. I'm willing to continue leading this project, but not under sabotage. Here is the documentation. The decision is yours. 3 days later, Gregory was removed from all decisions related to my department. He wasn't punished, just contained. Enough for me to move forward. And with that, I gained more than respect. I gained autonomy. 1 month later, I was invited to present the restructuring results at the company's annual leadership meeting. I prepared the material with the same care as always, but added something new: storytelling. Not just numbers, but context. Stories of the team's growth, lessons from the process, insights about trust-based leadership. When I finished, the auditorium was silent. And then a long round of applause. Genuine. Respectful. The next day, the email arrived. Subject: official appointment. Body: Isabella Martins. The company's executive board is pleased to formally announce your promotion to Director of Strategic Operations. This recognition is not only for your exceptional results, but for the way you achieved them. No noise. No favors. No dragging anyone down. I had taken Eric's place. Without shouting. Without confrontation. Only with the consistency of someone who knows exactly where she's going. And for the first time, the badge reflected what deep down I had always known. I was already that leader. They just took a little too long to realize it. The promotion didn't change my rhythm. It confirmed it. I wasn't interested in replicating Harold's style. I didn't need to control the room with volume. I led with presence. With preparedness. With precision. My leadership wasn't performative. It was structural. Not a show of power, but a proof of purpose. One of my first moves was to dismantle the hierarchy he'd enforced. That meant removing the symbolic barriers first, the corner offices with closed doors, the reserved spaces that once symbolized untouchable authority. I replaced those spaces with collaborative zones. Glass walls instead of concrete ones. Tables where voices could intersect. I created cross-functional working groups. Removed silos. Instituted monthly transparency reviews. Each department began to see itself not as an isolated island, but as part of a wider ecosystem. Communication wasn't just top-down anymore, it was circular, dynamic. People started talking to each other again, not just reporting upward, but collaborating laterally. The company began to breathe differently. I also restructured the analyst pipeline. For years, new talent had been reduced to silent labor, doing the heavy lifting while someone else claimed the credit. I changed that. We launched a mentorship program focused on 3 things: voice, credit, and impact. Every contributor would be visible. Every idea traceable. No more stolen spotlights. I called it the integrity track, and within 6 months, it became a benchmark for other departments. Analysts who had once considered leaving were now leading. Some had found confidence in their work for the first time. Others had simply needed someone to say, "Yes, that was yours. Thank you." The results were immediate. Higher engagement scores, better retention, and a 19% increase in strategic initiative success within the first 2 quarters.
But those were just numbers on a slide.
What mattered more was the energy in the building, the lightness in the meetings, the humor returning to hallways that had once echoed only tension. Still, there were whispers from those who missed the old ways. Some said I was too methodical. Others said I lacked charisma, that I didn't command the room. I didn't argue. I let the numbers speak. I let the culture evolve.
Quietly, consistently.
But I also listened. I wasn't above feedback. I held listening forums, open Q&As, anonymous suggestion boxes. And through those voices, I adjusted. Where clarity was needed, I gave it. Where empathy was asked, I deepened it. Leadership, after all, is not perfection, it's presence. Then came the turning point. In a shareholder forum packed with scrutiny and pressure, someone asked a question. Simple, direct. What caused this remarkable turnaround? The CFO didn't pause. He looked around the room and said, "Clarity." And Julia. The room was silent for a moment. Then came the nods, the subtle shifts in posture. It wasn't applause, it was recognition. That moment sealed it. Not because it was public, but because it was earned. And I realized this wasn't just about recovering a title. It was about reclaiming identity, agency,
voice.
I remembered the day I sat in that elevator after being demoted, holding back tears as my name was quietly removed from decision chains. That memory stayed with me, not as pain, but as fuel. Now, I wasn't just in the room. I was shaping it. I wasn't asking to be seen. I had built the structure where everyone could be,
including me.
So when young professionals ask me now how to survive unjust emotion, I tell them, you don't fight the fire with noise. You study the wind. You learn the structure. And then you rebuild the foundation from underneath, brick by brick, until the day you become the architect, without ever needing permission. It was never about titles. Not really. But the day they removed his nameplate from the office door and didn't replace it with anyone's, something inside me shifted. There was no rush to engrave a new plaque, no announcement with bold fonts or celebratory emails. Just a quiet emptiness where arrogance used to reside. That office, once dominated by Michael Carr's presence, his deep voice echoing in conference calls, his habitual dismissal of opposing views, his subtle smirks of superiority, was now occupied by a different kind of energy. One built on respect, strategy, and resilience.
Mine.
My journey to this point hadn't been clean or painless. I had spent months slowly rewiring the culture from within, building alliances not with noise but with proof of performance, clarity, and leadership. Michael's demotion had caused a temporary vacuum, but the structure we'd rebuilt during his unraveling had already found new balance. Not in any one person, but in a network of competence that no longer bowed to egos. After Michael's departure, which was labeled as a transition to advisory capacity, in the official memo, the office politics quieted. But silence doesn't mean absence of movement. Behind that silence, things accelerated. The board, once cautiously skeptical, now called me directly for insights. Department heads aligned their strategies based on my directives. My name was not on the door, but it was in every inbox that mattered. Still, I was careful. I didn't rush to sit at the top. Power gained too quickly is often unstable. Instead, I led from the hallway. I joined project reviews uninvited, offered support when no one asked, brought coffee to night shift analysts, and shared credit even when it was clearly mine alone. People noticed. They always do. Then came the opportunity one hadn't expected. A high-stakes merger. 2 international entities. A volatile negotiation. The board was split. The pressure was immense. And someone had to lead the due diligence committee. Publicly. Officially. The chairman called me after hours. "I know you haven't taken a formal position yet," he said, "but this requires someone the entire team trusts. Someone who doesn't just understand the numbers, but the people behind them." I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "I'll do it." What followed was the most intense 11 weeks of my career. Time zones blurred. I slept in conference rooms. I mediated shouting matches between conflicting executives and negotiated compliance protocols across borders. I led with calm, even when facing billion-dollar setbacks. And through it all, I made sure one thing remained constant: transparency. By the time we closed the deal, the value of the company had increased by 18%. The merger was hailed as one of the most efficient and ethically clean integrations in recent history. Publications wrote about it. Investors quoted it. And at the post-merger press conference, the CEO of the partner firm turned to me and said, "She's the reason this didn't fall apart. If we had her in our corner a year ago, our previous attempt wouldn't have failed." The board sent flowers to my home. But more importantly, they requested an emergency meeting. And that's where it happened. The conference room was filled with executives I had known for over a decade. Some had ignored me for years. Others had once copied me only in CC. But now, their attention was undivided. "We want you to step in," the chairman said. "Officially. As interim COO." I smiled. Not because it was unexpected, but because it was earned. The title came quietly, just like everything else in my path. I didn't change offices. I didn't host a celebratory dinner. But things changed. Rapidly. Meetings started when I entered. Teams waited for my guidance before acting. Executives who had once overlooked me now sought my perspective before making decisions. Michael never returned. His so-called advisory role became less frequent, until it was nothing more than a forgotten footnote. And me? I kept doing what I had always done: observe, plan, execute. But now I did it from a position where I could protect others like me, those who work in silence, those who are underestimated, those who refuse to climb by stepping on others. Months passed. Eventually, the interim role became permanent. A simple clause updated in the internal systems. No headlines. But the difference was felt. Across departments, across continents. I had taken his position. Not with sabotage. Not with theatrics. But with competence. With proof. With relentless patience. And as I stood one evening by the office window, looking out at the city skyline, that same skyline I once watched while packing my things in shame, I realized something. Sometimes, the best revenge is not retaliation. It's transformation. And mine was complete.